Yuta vs Maki, the cursed child versus the last Zenin clan member. Today we'll be talking about Yuta vs Maki, which you probably guessed from the thumbnail. That will be all arcs, meaning we will be basically comparing Yuta and Maki throughout the entire story of Jujutsukaisen, since they are both important and big characters to the story. But I do want to get right into it, although since Yuta isn't present at the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen, I'll be using his JJK0 version until we get later into the video where he gets back into the main story. So first starting off with JJK0, the arc where Yuta is introduced, and Maki as well, since this story takes place before the events of the main story with Yuji and Sukuna. So let's get started. First, Maki is a grade 4 sorcerer at this point of the story and mostly uses cursed tools, since she has little to no cursed energy and uses her glass to see cursed. In terms of feats, we don't get much from her. We know that she's most likely strong even to exercise weak curses, and in terms of skill in combat, she outclasses Yuta when they spar with weapons. Although this is just a spar at the end of the day, Maki should be physically more resilient and tougher than the normal sorcerer, but that only gets her so far. I'll explain why by getting into Yuta. Now, Yuta himself gets progressively stronger as the arc goes on, but regardless of this, Yuta has Rika, a special grade vengeful curse in his arsenal, which is even capable of destroying Geto's curses and keeping up with Geto himself. Yuta by the end of the manga is also strong enough to be on par with Geto and even outclasses his maximum Uzumaki. This is the same Geto that beat Maki half to death pretty easily and effortlessly, along with also beating Inumaki and Panda, two people that are on the same level as Maki without breaking a sweat. With everything I went over, I do think Yuta takes this pretty easily, being a prodigy that just outclasses Maki with his hacks alone, since I don't even think Maki could keep up with Yuta in a real fight, due to Yuta just being way stronger and Rika coming to assist him. The next arc that we will be going over is the Goodwill event, where Maki is of course stronger than her JJK0 version. We will be sticking with Yuta's JJK0 version since again, he has not made an appearance yet in the main story, and the Goodwill event arc is where we get a better showing and strength of the stronger version of Maki. Now, Maki, even stated by Gojo, should be grade 2 level at this point, but the Zenin family gets in the way of her promotion. Maki herself is able to outclass Miwa and Mai, beating them without much difficulty before we get the confirmation that Maki is superhuman or has superhuman capabilities. Also an impressive feat, she is also able to use Playful Cloud to hit Hanami and send her flying back. Maki is able to, with the help of Megumi, overwhelm Hanami. Why this is impressive for her to even damage or send Hanami back is because she's the most durable of the disaster curses, so damaging her is pretty impressive. Although even with Maki being very impressive in this arc, JJK0 Yuta would still outclass her. Even with her feats, Yuta would still be higher due to the fact again, she would still be nowhere near the strength of Geto, a special grade that beats her on top of the fact that is narratively implied in the Goodwill arc that Yuta is just beyond everyone there, saying he made the Goodwill event completely one-sided. The next arc we will be moving on to is the Shibuya incident arc. Yuta does make an appearance in this arc, so we will use him in this arc and move on from his JJK0 version. First, let's go over Maki's showings in the Shibuya incident. Maki is able to have okay feats against Dagon, but she is saved more times than her actual feats in that fight. Although her feats are still pretty viable, as she's able to block a hit from Dagon inside his domain, which he would be naturally amped inside his domain, but what makes this so impressive is that she was also being held down by countless Shikigami as well. She can also tag Dagon and contend with him in his domain, so she can somewhat take on a special grade, but to let it be known, Dagon isn't truly fast or known for his speed, since in terms of speed he doesn't have anything impressive, but Jogo outclass him in speed by a gap. Maki doesn't get further than that since Jogo takes her out, being on an entirely different level than Dagon. Now with Yuta, we don't get a lot from him in Shibuya, but there is a narrative being drawn out when Gojo and Kenjaku talk about Yuta, with Gojo stating how strong Yuta is, basically believing that he could get in the way of Kenjaku's plans. They soon go on to mention his ability to copy curse techniques and then his boundless cursed energy. He also destroys a random curse at the end of the arc. Now, who comes on top in this arc? Now, Maki has gotten stronger and is more impressive now with her feats on Dagon, but in comparison to Yuta, I don't think it's enough to measure up to him, with it just being narratively implied that Yuta is one of the strongest and someone Gojo deems as strong. With his bandless cursed energy, it also allows him to amp his physicals to a different level, along with Rika too. Both have a high stature of cursed energy and powerful abilities that make them almost impossible to defeat, especially when Maki still should be on the level of a grade 2. So I do think this one also goes to Yuta, which moves us on to our next two arcs, which would be Yuta in the Yuji Extermination arc and Maki in the Perfect Preparation arc. Since neither are present in both arcs, with Yuta not necessarily doing anything in the Perfect Preparation arc and Maki not being present in the Yuji Extermination arc, let's go over what Yuta does in the Yuji Extermination arc. Yuta's first appearance, Yuji mistakes him for Gojo due to his power, but then calls him creepier, which could be interpreted in a few ways, but for the sake of it, let's just say his presence is creepier because of Gojo, or because of Rika. Once their fight starts, Yuji comments on how fast Yuta is running even with holding a katana. Yuta is also somewhat physically strong. He is able to throw a car back at Yuji. Another statement that Yuta's cursed energy is that he is confirmed to have more cursed energy than Gojo. Yuji also states that Yuta isn't necessarily hard to predict, but his attacks are decisive and he can always keep damage to a minimum. Eventually, Yuta beats Yuji by Rika summoning out by herself, being so powerful that Yuji can't even break out himself. Yuta also knocks out Chozo in one blow, something Yuji himself could not do. Yuta also has RCT as well, which is how he stopped Yuji from dying, but something to point out is I do think Yuta was holding back on him due to the fact his plan was probably to do this from the start, which he had to specifically stab Yuji in his heart to stop it, and then immediately use RCT to heal him instead of just outright using Rika from the start, or even taking this battle seriously. But it's also made known to us that Yuji is also holding back as well. Yuta does also have statements in scaling the 15-finger Sukuna via Yuji saying that he thinks Yuta could kill or be the one to fight Sukuna, saying he thinks he could be the one, but he would only be referring to a base Yuta, and possibly Rika with a glimpse of her power. Although it's a chance Yuji doesn't have an accurate gauge of Sukuna's power or how strong he is, but he did retain knowledge of him eating the 10 fingers to make it 15 fingers he had ingested. So I think at the lowest, he thinks Yuta has a chance against Sukuna at least, which is still better than nothing. That is pretty much everything for Yuta in that arc. And now we can move on to Maki in the Perfect Preparation arc, which by far is way stronger than every version we have covered so far. Since this arc she fully awakens her heavenly restriction, Maki is able to just outright blitz Obi and the Kukuru unit, which she absolutely annihilates them. Maki is also able to deal with the Hei somewhat easily, even with them jumping her, and they are stated to be the strongest sorcerers of the Zenin clan. Her body is also so fortified that Ranta's curse technique can't even hold her. After she is done killing all of the Hei, she fights Naoya, as she can react to base Naoya somewhat easily until he uses projection sorcery and sends her flying. It's stated Maki is at a disadvantage due to her injuries and blood loss, and also due to Naoya also being subsonic speed, it being implied as top speed he's faster than her. But due to the heightened senses, she can still perceive Naoya and react to him, where she can basically one-shot him with one punch from her. She also receives the Soul Split Katana as well, which is a powerful special grade tool. Yuta and Maki both get way better scaling since Maki awakens and Yuta gets more definitive scaling to his name. Now how they compare against each other is actually quite interesting, although I do think Yuta, even after her awakening, is definitely on the same tier as Maki in physical attributes. I do think Maki is physically stronger and probably naturally tougher than Yuta is, but I do think Yuta is faster. In terms of speed, Maki should slightly be above base Naya, since she does hold back, so she does block all of his attacks, but gets grabbed by him as well, along with him trying to tag her once again, and she blocks the tag. So I think they have somewhat relative speed scaling, but this could be due to her being injured and blood loss too. But at the highest point, this would just put her on the higher speed tier than base Naya, since we already know projected sorcery. Naya is incredibly fast, but since Maki gained enhanced senses, she understood projection sorcery and used it against them. Yuta on the other hand is also faster than him as well, and I'd argue by a bigger margin, as when Yuta and Naoya face off against Yuji and Chozo, Naoya is closer to Chozo, and when Chozo tries to use a technique, they both react at the same time and run at Chozo. With Yuta getting there at the same time and even further, although this could be due to him going after Yuji, but regardless he traveled a longer distance than Naoya. in a shorter amount of time as well. I just realized I was saying his name wrong the entire time. That's hilarious. Along with the fact Yuta just blitzes Chozo, something Naohaya couldn't even do in base, so I just think he would upscale more than Maki does with this comparison. Now Yuta's hacks in a way is what really seals the deal since he still has Rika, which is usually relative to him, or if love amped is probably higher. But with Rika, Yuta can continue to replenish his cursed energy pool and access cursed speech as well. Now, since Maki's body is stronger and tougher and all of her senses have increased and been heightened, it's in question if cursed speech would even work on her, but I personally think it would, but to a certain extent. Like for an example, if Yuta used his cursed speech and told Maki to kill herself, I feel like it would work, but she would have resistance to it, not instantly killing herself, of course. But due to Yuta's output, I think it would eventually succeed. Now, the only way I can see Maki truly winning this is if she uses her perk of not being able to be sensed and stabbed Yuta in a vital spot with Soul Split Katana, which is a Dura neck essentially. Maki can directly cut Yuta's soul with it, so if she lands a lethal blow, the win is almost guaranteed hers. But I think under normal circumstances, I'd give this one to Yuta clearly, but it is definitely way closer than the past matchups. That will conclude those two arcs and move us right along to the Culling games. To give a quick summary on what changes about the McCullen games is that Maki has to fight the cursed version of Naohaya and ends up being the victor and gets stronger, becoming a demonic fighter equal to Toji Zenny. Maki also has feats on 15 Finger Sukuna, but only in terms of physical relativity. Since Sukuna output was only nerfed, but says himself, his physicals are fine. Where Maki proceeds to be able to tag him and even take point blank punches from him and shrug them off without taking super significant damage. But no, I don't think Maki is on the same level as 15 Finger Sukuna at his peak when he can use his techniques. But she would scale to him at least in terms of speed and strength, which is still impressive, and with that we can move on to Yuta. Yuta in Culling Games pretty much runs a gauntlet with his entire colony. Yuta fights Kuro, Oro, and Ryu back to back, and it's implied he did this all while holding back, since Ryu said without the rule Yuta would have killed them. Yuta also does have access to sky manipulation, same as Oro, and he also gains just overall better scaling to his name. But with all of these extra factors, the question is, does the outcome change? Yes and no in a way. Let me explain. Maki now being so strong that she can physically keep up with 15 Finger Sukuna is a big problem, since I do think that would give her the speed advantage over Yuta now by a decent margin. I do think Yuta can still react to her though. I don't think she can just outright just blitz him, but it would make it harder for him to keep up with her speed. But now that he has sky manipulation, he is way better defensively and offensively, since he should be able to just do the same thing Oro does with him and just distort space to mess up her chain of attacks. Although in a head-on battle, I do think Maki outskills him with weapons if he was to use his katana to fight her with her sword. I do think that wouldn't really end well for him due to Maki now being way stronger and faster and being skilled with cursed tools and weapons, since she uses them more than anything else. Now adding Rika onto the factor, I do think Rika she might just be able to outlast her, since he could simply just well back up his cursed energy, along with the fact that, like I touched up on before, Rika is around the same level as Yuta, so that puts her at a disadvantage having to fight both. In my honest opinion, I do think this one could go either way, with Maki just physically outpacing Yuta and overwhelming him, or Yuta just out-hacking Maki. But for the sake of the video, I will give it to Maki, since I could see it easily being leaned towards her due to her scaling the Sukuna and her Soul Split Katana, which would now get us into the last and final arc, which is the Shinjuku Showdown. In the Shinjuku Showdown arc, Yuta and Maki both have feats on True Form Sukuna to specify after he's fatigued and weakened, after fighting Gojo of course. Both of them having their encounters and new scaling to go off of, since prior to them fighting Sukuna, they trained for 3 months, so they are now significantly stronger as well. Now Yuta and Maki pair up fairly well against each other in this arc. In terms of physical stats, I do think Maki is superior to Yuta, although you could argue the Sukuna Maki was fighting was amped. I don't think it would be a big enough gap for her to just blitz Yuta, so they should be relative in speeds. Yuta also does have Rika, who also went relative and has scaling to the weaker Sukuna as well, and it is always just implied Rika is near or on the same level as Yuta. Since Yuta trained, Rika also got stronger, and we can tell this by her form changing and her size looking bigger than it was before, so she has gotten stronger as well. So Maki once again has to deal with both of them similar to how Sukuna had to, although I feel like the biggest problem for Maki to deal with is Yuta's domain. Now, due to her cursed energy, the shorehead effect won't work, and neither is she forced to be in the domain, but that does not mean she's just safe from the domain itself, since as long as she's in Yuta's vision, he can still attack her, and him and Rika can keep her from leaving. Yuta would also be naturally amped by his domain along with having an arsenal of cursed techniques. His techniques were so powerful in his domain that he was able to hurt and damage Sukuna. I just don't really see much hope in Maki being able to beat Yuta with his hacks and the fact that he just has a lot more advantages over her. So I'm going to give this one to Yuta. This would mean Yuta won in every arc beside Culling Games, which would make him the overall victor over Maki. This also concludes the entire video itself and brings us to the end. Of course, if you got to this point and you enjoyed this video, I really would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed, since you guys have already gotten me super close to 3K in such a short time. I truly appreciate it, and like I say in my other topics, if you have any thoughts or your own takes, you're free to share it in my comments. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.